cooking in the Katto kitchen.
Beauty.
Cool.
Okay.
Glad it's not S's because I've got a list. Hi, I'm Struan from Provenance. Today we're going to be breaking down this rib of beef, turning it into a ribeye, putting some steaks on the barbecue. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is take the cap off the forerib and we'll reveal the ribeye, and then we'll take the ribeye off the bone and take the dry age off, slice some steaks, get it on the barbecue. So I'm going to use the knife mostly in a dagger grip because it gives you a lot more control of the knife. And really what you can see here is you're using your left hand as much as you are the knife. They're working in conjunction together to peel this away. The more you pull it back, the more you can see what you're doing, and it allows you to run just down the seam, which is where you want to be. You don't want to be going through the meat, you want to be going around the good stuff along the top of the ribeye. It's always a good idea to stop and look, see where you are. Don't get too caught up at one end and come around. So we're going to peel this off. So this meat on the outside cooks very, very differently to how the ribeye would in the middle. It sort of protects it. So if you're cooking a rib, like a rib roast, you can keep this on and this cap can bear the brunt of the heat of the oven while protecting the stuff in the middle that you want to cook medium rare. But think of this like short rib or brisket. We use this in our burgers because it's been dry aged on the rib for a long time. It's got full of flavor. By the time it's minced and with a good, seam of fat running through it as well, it makes for really excellent burger meat. So once we get down to there, I'm just going to trim it off. That's a very sharp knife. So what you've got there is that section away. So now really you've just got the ribeye still sat on the backbone and the ribs. I'll need a bit of tidying up at the end. We've still got the dry age on there, so you can't eat that bit. We'll take that off when we're cutting the steaks. Next step is really to take the ribeye off the ribs. So this has been aged for about 50 days. And this is a belted Galloway from North Yorkshire, just on the edge of the North Yorkshire moors, from a farmer called Charles Ashbridge, who is a 4th generation beef farmer. He's been our supplier since we opened our first store 8 years ago, and he's just doing it the right way, Belted Galloway is a great beef cattle. They're also really handsome looking things in the field. So they're black body with a big white stripe through the middle of them, a little bit of white on the face. Gorgeous looking things. Okay, so I've separated it from the ribs there. I'm just going to come round. We'll trim this out, the intercostal muscles, and that will go into a cottage pie, burgers potentially as well. But you can make a beautiful beef stock with it. It's going to be a pretty punchy beef stock because the beef's been dry aged. But yeah, there's loads of nutrients in there, loads of flavor. Great if you are making like a gravy rather than a stock for health, I guess, because it's got loads of flavor. But a bit of bone marrow melted into it is a perfect complement for the steaks we're going to be putting on the barbecue. All right. So that's taken the ribeye off. There's a little bit more trimming to come through here. Do that in a sec. But yeah, that's what's left. And this here, I always find interesting and tell people when they watch us doing it, is the paddy whack. So you obviously know, knick-knack, paddy whack, give the dog a bone. This is that, and it's a really, really tough, stringy, rubbery piece of sinew that effectively holds the cow's head up. So if you think, it's kind of counterintuitive that the animal's natural position when the muscles are relaxed is the head being pulled up by this, and then it has to use its muscles to move the head down to graze, which is what it spends most of its time doing. Going on the principle that the more work a muscle has done, the more flavor it has in it, the less tender it is, which is why the front of the animal generally is a slower cooking cut chuck for stews and brisket for slow smoking. That's because that muscle is constantly pulling the head down to do the grazing, so it's working against the force of this. And that runs all the way along the back and pulls it back up. Put this to one side, and then we'll just tidy up the ribeye. So we don't want to keep this little capricino across the top. And unfortunately, there's not much you can do with this, but there's not a lot that goes to waste. I mean, it stands across all animals, but there's a saying that the only thing you don't use in a pig is the oink. And you're not far off with most other animals as well. I get asked a lot what my favorite steak cut is. And it really depends on the occasion. So for me, if I've got lots of friends over, cooking on a barbecue, a nice thick cut like a ribeye or a big thick rump that I can slice into a tagliata like we're gonna do today is great. If I've got a bit of time and I'm doing something by myself, maybe I'll pick out a muscle like a Denver or a flat iron and, you know, really focus in on getting the absolute best out of it, whether that's reverse searing or sous vide cooking. It should all be good. It just depends on the situation, I think. So I'm gonna take this bit of dry age off, reveal the beef underneath. So I'm using the bigger knife for this, smaller knife for working against bones, bigger knife, we call it a staking knife. And there you have it, beautiful ribeye. So I'm gonna cut a couple of thick ones to cook on the barbecue as a tagliata. One there. You want to go thick on this because you want to be able to get the char on the outside. You want to be able to have as much of the Maillard reaction as possible, which is where the proteins naturally start to turn into sugars and caramelize. That's going to create umami, and umami is that fifth taste. It's all about savory and satisfaction. When that hits the tongue, balanced out with the rare meat in the middle, you've got a great combination and a great sharing steak. Okay, we're on the roof. It's cold, it's grey. It's time to barbecue. We're gonna cook these beautiful belted Galloway steaks, just really simply, straight on the grill. Then we're gonna slice them up like a tagliata and enjoy them. So I'm gonna give these a bit of seasoning first, actually, just as they go on. And there we are. Once they're on, a little on the other side. Now these you don't need to close the lid on. You can just watch these go. You can get a bit of ambient heat, but you're gonna get loads of char on the outside. They're thin enough just to let them go like this. Two different schools of thought. One of them is constantly turning them. I think scientifically, that will give you a slightly more even cook, but realistically, just don't overcook it. Don't burn it. And always remember, the steak is gonna continue cooking in the core after it's come off the heat because the meat on the outside is hot as well. So better to underdo them than to overdo them. They're gonna cook a little bit more when they're resting. And the resting is like the longest 10 minutes of any day. You've got two great cooked steaks sitting on a board and you just have to wait. Yeah, it's a tough wait, but it's well worth it. Okay, so I think it's time to flip the steaks now. Just gotta check the tongs are working. And they look pretty good. Good char lines on there. I'm gonna put a little bit of salt back on so you're building the seasoning layers. Now we're gonna brush some butter over with this little herb brush. So that will impart a little bit of the herby flavors on there as well. And the butter's just gonna bring out some of those beefy flavors too. Add a little bit of char, and we'll do it again when we flip it over in a sec. Okay, so we're just gonna check the char on the other side. That's looking pretty consistent. I'm gonna flip it over, give it a little bit more of the butter. And then I think these are gonna come off and rest. So I would rest these for around 5 minutes. If you've got longer or you've got a thicker piece, you can rest them for longer. Really, the science of it is your olfactory nerve has a spectrum of what it can sense, what it can smell. And at extremes of temperature, it can't take in that whole spectrum. So if you're eating a sizzling hot steak, you're not gonna get some of the nuances, some of the more complex flavors. You're just gonna get the heat. It kind of overwhelms that. And the same if you're eating, you know, like a slice of cold leftover steak out of the fridge. It doesn't taste as good as if it was at room temperature. So you don't want to go crazy hot, but you don't want it ice cold because that doesn't make for a great eating experience either. Okay, it's time to eat. Let's get the steak on the board, slice it like a tagliata, see what we're dealing with. All right, that is looking right on. Depending on how you like it. I mean, the great thing with something like a ribeye that's got lots of marbling is you don't have to eat it super rare if that's not how you like it. This will still have loads of succulence. I'm pretty happy with that at medium rare. So, another pinch of salt and a dollop of béarnaise. And I'm going to dive in. It's pretty good. Okay, so that's how a butcher cooks his steak. I'd love to hear how you guys do yours, so put it in the comments below and enjoy the cooking. Cheers.